I'm happy to introduce Mr. Moshe Vardi, that Y was not explained to me, who came over all the way from Texas, where he is a professor of computer science. And I love when people have been doing this job for a long time. They got these simple titles, like I'm a professor of computer science. I worked with Tim Berners-Lee a few times, and he's like, I'm a web developer, which is also quite fun to hear when somebody does something like that. So I'm actually looking forward to see what's going on with the ethical crisis in computing, and maybe we solve it today, maybe we won't, but at least we're going to have something to discuss afterwards. So without further ado, thank you very much, Mr. Moshe.
Thank you. So you're probably wondering, what is the question mark at the end of the title? Surely we have an ethical crisis in computing. So let me start step back a little bit. There is a philosophical principle that I think goes back to Vienna, Wittgenstein in Vienna, who said that every game has one unwritten rule. And that rule is, follow the rules of the game. And if you write down that rule, then you're still in another unwritten rule that will say, follow the rules of the game. Formally, we said that the rules of the game have to be common knowledge among the players, but it's not enough that everybody knows the rule, everybody knows the rule. The player must trust that everybody else is following the rule. Think about it. You're coming to a traffic light. You have green light. You want to drive. You have to trust that the folks that have a red light will stop. Another game that requires trust is democracy. And I think we're much more aware of this, that we need trust in democracy than we were just a few years ago. And in fact, trust is perceived to be incredibly important economically. This is from a recent article in the Financial Times. And they look at different countries and try to quantify trust. And they said the lack of trust in this country cost them dearly. They said, for example, income per capita would have increased by 69% in Russia, and on, had these countries inherited the same level of trust as Sweden. So trust is incredibly important to function an economy, to the economical game, so to speak. And I think there is a sense now that we have a crisis of trust, because we are living in a technology-driven world, and to trust technology, either you're very familiar with it, or most likely you're not, but at least you trust the people who develop the technology, or you don't know them personally, but you trust the company, or you don't even know the company, but you trust the industry. But what happens if it's none of the above? If you don't trust the technology, the people, the company, or even the industry itself. And so, look at the world we live in. Every week, a week doesn't pass by where we don't hear another attack. What was it, I think, just last week, Marriott lost the personal data of millions and millions of people. You know, somebody wrote, Matthew Green, recently, he's a cryptography researcher, just wrote, I used to trust some of the products of Google, such as Chrome. I don't anymore. Now it's preponderance of evidence that American democracy has been hacked. The only question is the degree of collusion. I'm a computing professional. I view the situation with cyber insecurity as a failure of my profession. Privacy, surveillance has become, it's not a feature, it's not a bug, it's a feature now. This we call surveillance capitalism. Automated decision making, I'll come back to it. We have increasingly more and more decisions about us, about our life, are made by black boxes. People talk about explainable AI, but it's a term of aspiration. There is no explainable AI yet. It's a research area. But automated decisions, the system have already been deployed, as I'll discuss in a few minutes. And do we trust technology vendors? If you use Twitter, have you read their privacy policy? It's written by lawyers. It's impenetrable. Surveillance, as I said, become a business model for many of these companies. This has become a surveillance capitalism. And there are a bunch of hypocrites. They used to say, do no evil, and now they're trying to see how much they can run away from their own slogan. We just recently saw read the New York Times, how tech executives want to make sure that their children do not use all these devices that they sell you, so your children will use them. It's for your children, not to their children. This is endemic to the industry. Even the CEO of Salesforce just came out a few months ago and said there is a crisis of trust concerning data privacy and cybersecurity. And you see at what we have become known now as the techlash, how the media start to respond and start to portray the tech industry as an evil industry. Peggy Noonan writes in the Wall Street Journal, and she talks about gun ownership, which I think was a red herring, but she explained why people feel so insecure because of their personal and financial information got hacked in the latest breach, because our country's real overloads are in Silicon Valley and appear to be moral Martians who operate on some weird new modern ethical wavelengths, and they will be the one programming the robots that will soon take all the jobs. Neil Ferguson, also in the New York Times, in a book review, most charming was the morphing of cyberspace into Siberia. We see, not to mention the cyber caliphates and dark and lawless realm, where malevolent actors ranging from Russian trolls to pro-ISIS Twitter users. So this is increasingly the image that the tech industry is having. Or just a couple of months ago, John Oliver was a comedian on American TV, and he described Facebook as a fetid swamp of mistruth and outer lies. And he compared Facebook unfavorably to toilets that make sugar go away. Where Facebook retains sugar, disseminating sugar to your acquaintances, and reminds you of sugar 7 years ago, while allowing corporations to put their sugar in front of you. What I'm saying, says Oliver, there is purity and integrity to toilets that Facebook seriously lacks. So this is what is called the techlash. And some of the things that many people here are celebrating, big data, machine learning, has already received a black eye. This is a book that came in 2016, Weapon of Math Distractions, and Cathy O'Neill, and she said the models being used today are opaque, unregulated, and contestable, even when they are wrong. Models are propping up the lucky and punishing the downtrodden. Welcome to the dark side of big data. And I want to take a very concrete example, which is use of big data and machine learning in the justice system. So last year, John G. Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States, visited Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York State. And he had a fireside chat with the president, Shirley Ann Jackson, the president of RPI. And she asked him, can you foresee a day when smart machine driven with artificial intelligence will assist with courtroom fact-finding or, more controversially, even judicial decision-making? And he answers, it's a day that's here, and it's putting a significant strain on how the judiciary goes about doing things. So the day is already here. We're already using automated decision system in the justice system. And there are many applications, making bail decision, who goes on bail, who stays in jail, sentencing decision, parole, separating children from parents, and so on and so forth. And you can go and find beautiful websites, a company called North Point. And the website is wonderful, talks about advancing justice, embracing community. How can you not advance justice and embrace community? What's wrong with that? Except when you dig deeper, you see what's wrong with that. So already in May 16, ProPublica, a not-for-profit investigative journalism outfit, find out that the software that is used to predict future criminals, and surprise, it's biased against blacks because the data is biased. We all understand it now. The data is biased, the decisions are going to be biased. So it's biased against blacks. And just earlier this year, the system Compass, promoted by this company, was finally somebody audited and showed that it's a fancy schmancy machine learning. But at the end of the day, when they compare it, it does no better than when a person with no experience would do. And in fact, it's a linear regression over 2 features. That's all that you do there. And even some of the people, some major researchers in machine learning are coming to criticize their own discipline. Ali Rahimi from Google, first he blogged about it, and then he published a paper about it. And he said machine learning algorithms have become a form of alchemy. Researchers do not know why some algorithms work and others don't, nor do they have rigorous criteria for choosing one architecture over another. That's what he called alchemy. And so just to give you an analogy, let's imagine the following scenario. I have a very nice black Labrador. You see, it's very cute. And I have trained him to detect risk of recidivism. Recidivism, it means criminal who goes back to do more crime. And in fact, Fluffy, people have tested Fluffy, and Fluffy is very, very accurate, 95% accurate. In fact, he's more accurate than human judges. But as you can see, Fluffy is a black box, does not give any explanation. So the question is, would you allow Fluffy to make parole decisions? Now, of course, we all laugh, and we said, no, of course, we're not going to let a dog make parole decisions. But how is Fluffy the dog much worse than a black box machine learning where you don't know the algorithm, you haven't seen the data, and it gives no explanation? It's not any better. I'm a computer scientist. I've been doing research in AI now for longer than I want to say here. And I'm having my Ender's Game moment. How many people have read Ender's Game? So I'm going to do spoiler alert here. Close your eyes, close your ears if you don't want to hear me. The basic plot of Ender's Game, a book from the mid-'80s, was that Ender is a child, and he and his team are playing video games. That's what they think. What they don't know is they're fighting an intergalactic war, and they win. And they only find that out at the end, and they discover they've not only won the game, they've destroyed the civilization. So many of us had got into computer science because it was a fun game, and now we're discovering that our technology is running the world, and not necessarily for the better. And so over the past year, there is a proclamation that the problem is there's an ethics crisis. New York Times from February. Tech's ethical dark side. Harvard, Stanford, and others wants to address it. And every computer science department now is trying to introduce an ethics course. Boston Globe, computer science faces an ethics crisis. The Cambridge Analytica scandal proves it. New York Times, from October, something chief ethics officer would help technology company navigate political and social questions. And the question mark that I put at the end of my title was because I want to challenge that. I want to challenge the issue that what we are facing is an ethics crisis. I'm going to be the skeptic on this debate of ethics. And I want to give an analogy why I'm skeptic that what we're dealing here is an ethical crisis. So imagine, go back 110 years, and the Ford Model T, I think in October of 1908, the Ford Model T rolls off the production line. Now, the Ford Model T is not the first automobile. The first automobile was about 50 years before that in Europe with a steam engine. But the Ford Model T was the first automobile that was mass consumed and mass produced. It changed the world. 20th century was a century of the automobile. And very quickly, people discover what we all know: automobiles kill people. So we have spent the last 110 years trying to reduce the fatality rate. So there are all kinds of ways to measure it, but the most important thing is what you see in the red curve, and this is death per millions vehicles mile traveled. How many people die per billions of miles traveled? And what you can see that we've been able to reduce it now over 110 years very significantly. It's a fraction of what it used to be 100 years ago. So we have actually, of course, more people get killed because there are more automobiles and more people. But if you measure the fatality rate, it's been going down for 100 years. Actually, it is recently spiking up because of DWT, driving while texting. Technology actually is now raising the fatality rate. How did we do that? Well, by a whole bunch of different measures. You know, we put mirrors, and now we have anti-lock brakes and airbags, and we changed the way street walks, and we have crosswalks, and traffic not lights, I'm sorry, this is a typo. And we have laws. If you drive while intoxicated, it's a crime. Now in Texas, last year we passed finally, if you drive while you text, it's a crime, and so on and so forth. What did we not do? We did not say, oh, driving is dangerous. Let's take all the drivers and give them ethics training so they will be more responsible drivers. Of course, we may think it's a good thing for them to do ethics, but that was not the solution. What was the solution? The solution was public policy. Public policies, we as a society have to reduce the fatality rate, the accident rate, and we came up with a whole bunch of measures to do that. The solution was not ethics. That's the important point. So now let's go back and look, now let's apply this to the internet. So the internet, to look at the history of the internet, you have to go back to the Middle Ages, the 1980s, and you see precursors of the internet. There was the Well, which was a bulletin board, dial-up bulletin board in Silicon Valley, and created much of the early culture of the internet. If you're old enough, you may remember Usenet, which was a Unix worldwide distribution discussion bulletin board. And if you want to look at the culture in which this system developed, you have to go back to the 60s, 1960s, and you should know the 1960s happened really in the 70s. What we call today as the culture of the 1960s is really late 60s and early 70s. And that culture was partly anti-establishment. You can think of the student uprising in Paris in 1968, and the anti-Vietnam demonstration in the United States, again in the late 60s. They were very anti-establishment. And out of this anti-establishment culture came a principle: information wants to be free. And indeed, the web implemented that idea. The web was an unfettered public sharing for information. And when the web came about, everybody started posting some information on the web, and very quickly people discover, how do you find information? Too much information. And so this became the problem in the 90s was, how do I find information on the web? And the first solution was, you may remember Yahoo tried to do it, a directory. We'll have a catalog, a library catalog, for all information on the web. Quickly people realized it doesn't scale. So we need another solution, search engines. Early search engines, like Alta Vista, for example, they were terrible. And finally, Google came with a brilliant algorithm, PageRank, which gave you a nice ranking of results, and you finally good search engines. Except that Google now has a problem. Information is free. How do you monetize? How do they make money? What is their business model? And they had another brilliant idea. We'll keep information free, but we will sell advertising. So we'll take an idea that comes from newspaper and TV, we'll apply to the web, we will sell advertisement. That's how we're going to make money. Except that most of the time when you look at the web page, all of you, we have generally learned to ignore advertisements. And so they discovered that the click rate was very, very low. And so they came up with another idea of targeted advertising, or even people say micro-targeted advertising, which is we want to put on your screen, we want to put advertisement that will entice you personally to click. For this, we need personal data. So on Google and Facebook, you're not the customer. The advertising companies are the customers. You are the product. That's what they sell to these companies. They sell your data to company. And by your data, it's not only even your online data. Recently, it came to light that Google had a partnership with MasterCard. They want for MasterCard information, how do you behave offline? If you go and you buy things offline in the physical world with a credit card, Google wants to know that. So they need to know who you are to target advertising specifically for you. Now, how is it working for Google? Thank you, it's working extremely well. You can see here Google's business, and you can see that Google by now has about $100 billion of revenue every year just from advertising. You can see they started in 2001, and boy, it's doing extremely well. So If you look at the company Alphabet, they have many activities, but the main profit engine is Google, and mainly it's about advertising. Now, so let's talk about, we think that this is ethics. So let's imagine that we're going to take Sergey Brin and Larry Page to an ethics boot camp. And for a whole week, they will come willingly, and for a whole week, we will tell them about the categorical imperative and all various principles that philosophers have developed in ethics now for the past 2,500 years, going back to Socrates. Do we think they're going to come from this boot camp and have regrets and they say, you know, this business model we developed, it's ethically suspicious, so let's ditch it? No way. $100 billion. They're not going to abandon it. This is what Google is. And if Google has, when Sergey Brin and Larry Page started, when they had the IPO, they were very naive. They said, don't be evil. We will be strong in the long term. We'll be better served as shareholders and in all other ways by a company that does good things for the world, even if we forgo some short-term gains. Maybe some short-term gains, but $100 billion? So Google have been trying for years to run away. What are we doing about this slogan? Yes, we have this slogan. Let's try to, they didn't erase it, but they tried to bury it as much as they can over the past few years because they realized how naive they were in 2004 versus what they are today. So you might say, okay, but I get all these free services from Google. Maybe this is a fair deal. You're not getting anything free from Google. How do you think Google makes $100 billion? They have to make the money somewhere. So you say, well, it's not me. It's the advertising companies. Really? Where do they get the money? They pass the expenses back to you. You are paying to Google, except you're paying it in an indirect and roundabout and opaque way. And the outcome is mass surveillance. So what happened really here is we have seen other cases where somebody decides to destroy a market. Market comes with lots of flaws. But market gives us a mechanism to discover the value of things. What if the value of a clicker? Well, however much WeDeveloper was willing to pay for it. This is the value of the clicker. If somebody will come up with a better clicker and cheaper, then WeAreDeveloper will buy a cheaper clicker. That's how we find the value of a clicker. What is the value of this conference? However much you decided to pay for it, that's the value. The free market allows us to discover the value of products, but we don't have a free market in information because it's opaque and indirect. And so to speak, we can say the hippies destroyed the information market. So my claim is the issue is not about ethics, it is about public policy. How do we want our society to run? That's a matter of public policy. So, but you find out that there is very little public policy around information technology, especially in the United States. Why is that? And partly because the tech industry is a very powerful industry. You know, the market moves up and down, but if you look at the 5 big tech companies, they have market evaluation of about $4 trillion. That's a lot of money. These are very powerful corporations. And the industry for years has argued and lobbied against any attempt to legislate or regulate IT. Why? They say it will stifle innovation. So just a few months ago, Elon Musk, there was some argument that he violated security laws by doing some tweets to affect the stock price of Tesla. And so the Security Enforcement Commission started some action against him. And Wired magazine came up with the title, "The Case Against Elon Musk Will Chill Innovation." So there should be no public policy, even no enforcement of laws, because it may chill innovation, God forbid. And the part of the culture for that is a techno-utopian culture. So John Perry Barlow just died a few months ago, and he was one of the founders of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And in 1996, about 20 years ago, he wrote a Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. And it started, "Government of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of the mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past, to leave us alone. So that was the attitude, leave us alone. Don't put any laws, put no regulation. Somehow the attitude, what happened in cyberspace stays in cyberspace. Of course, we all know that this is not the case. Today, we can imagine, let's take a hypothetical scenario, a cyber attack on the US power grid. You know, people are debating how feasible it is, what does it take to do it, but it's a matter of serious discussion. Or let's take another hypothetical scenario, a cyber attack on the US election system. Oops, that actually did happen. Not by what people worried is about is a cyber attack on the voting machines or on the registration database. Turns out it's much easier to attack the weakest link. What is the weakest link? Us. That's the weakest link. That's how you attack the US election system, by a massive campaign of misinformation and leaking information selectively. And again, part of the culture of Silicon Valley is what I call the disruption culture. And what do I mean by that? So Clayton Christensen, a very well-known professor of business at Harvard, wrote an article in 1995 that essentially went viral about disruptive innovation. So what is disruptive innovation? It's when there is a new technology comes and totally disrupt the previous technology. We can think, for example, the PC and the mainframe. So generally speaking, he said, when a product or service take root initially in simple applications at the bottom of the market, and then relentlessly moves up market, eventually displacing established competitor. And he demonstrated it by looking actually at disk drive technology, which you go through different generations of technology, and every generation is done by a new entrant who disrupt the previous entrant. And so today disruption is a Silicon Valley mantra. They're running a conference. This is a picture from a conference that took place in San Francisco a few months ago, Disrupt. This is the mantra of Silicon Valley. But it's not a very long distance from disrupting to actually breaking. So Google's motto, until a few years ago, was move fast and break things. Unless you are breaking stuff, you're not moving fast enough. The question is, what are you breaking? Are you breaking Facebook internal processes, or are you breaking society? Now we know that Facebook principle of frictionless sharing enables massive dissemination of fake news. We now know that it had a decisive impact on the US 2016 presidential election. And if you want to know the details, there is a book that just came out by Kathleen Jamison, how the Russian hackers and trolls helped elect a president. What we can't and do now. And she said the case is not beyond reasonable doubt, but it's what she called preponderance of evidence, which is enough in civil courts. So technology is driving the future. I think we all realize it. The question is, who's doing the steering? And the answer is right now, this is tech corporations are doing the steering. Why? Because there is no public policy. Europe has started. Europe has been, in fact, before the United States, like GDPR, in trying to establish public policy. Is ethics important? Of course, ethics is important. For example, we do not allow in the developed world to sell organs for transplantation. Why? Because it thinks that it's morally abhorrent to sell organs for transplantation. We think that that people from weak socioeconomic strata will sell organs because that's the only way they can make money. So we do not allow it. So the ethics drives public policy. But we don't leave it at ethics. We do have public policy. So unfortunately, technology has moved so fast and continued to move so fast that public policy has lagged behind. And yes, technology rules and regulation will slow down innovation. But making sure that technology benefits society at this point is more important than having more innovation and more technology. And in fact, there is very clear now that which the industry has feared for so many years is going to happen. Here are just a bunch of headlines just from the last few months. Financial Times, social media platforms drawn into regulatory and political net. Guardian, time to regulate Bitcoin. Quartz, the EU enterprise chief is setting her sight on Amazon. New York Times, should legislators give consumer control over the data companies have on them? And most amazingly, just about a month ago, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, said regulations are inevitable. So I want to close by quoting some of our early pioneers. One of the first, what people call the saint of computing, is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who imagined computers in the, he built calculators, but he imagined what he called reasoning calculus. And he says mankind will then possess a new instrument that will enhance the capabilities of the mind to a far greater extent than optical instrument strengthens the eye. He didn't say new instruments that will replace the mind. He said new instrument that will enhance the mind. Not replacing intelligence, but augmenting intelligence. And about 200 years later, Ada Lovelace, and she generally perceived as the first programmer, and she worked with Babbage, and Babbage really had dreams of making lots of money from the computer, from this analytical engine that he never built. He really wanted to make money, and she wrote to him a letter, and she said, it's okay if you want to make money, but she said, I wish to add my might towards expounding and interpreting the Almighty, His laws and works for the most effective use of mankind. Ultimately, the goal should be to benefit humanity rather than just make money. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's a lot to take in, isn't it? I understand you've been kicking quite a hornet's nest with your article the other day that the hippies have ruined technology. What was that like?
Well, you know, for some reason, people took umbrage at this idea. I suspect that many of them, I guess, secretly identify with the hippies, and they didn't like being accused of destroying the internet. And so there was a fiery exchange about, first of all, people said the internet is alive and well. Who destroyed the internet? It's still running. Of course, I use the word destroyed in a metaphorical sense, right? Of course, the internet is still working. You know, I think there is wide agreement. In fact, your web developer that you mentioned before, Tim Berners-Lee, he's been very vocal that something went terribly wrong with his own creation, World Wide Web. He said he's incredibly distressed about it. And he said he now spent all of his energy trying to do something to improve the web, trying to create a new web that will not suffer from what happened to the web before. So I think there is wide agreement that something did go wrong with the internet, and I use internet in an expansive sense of the whole set of application. Now, we can debate, historian debate, you know, why did World War I broke out? Why were the great powers stupid to go into a war that destroyed many of them? So we can debate now what happened to the internet? Who lost the internet, so to speak? And I put a hypothesis out, and you know, history is not something that you can prove, right? You have to marshal, you have to say who tells the best story. So I'm open to people coming up with better story, how we lost the internet.
Yeah, not bad. I mean, you have your own style. I mean, your slide deck shows that, for starters. And it's interesting to see how many people were going for it as well. And I love the discussion about it, because I'd rather have us fighting over what the internet has become than just slowly let it fade away and go into the ownership of one or two companies, which is the more worrying agreement to me, because it gives so many people a voice. My whole career was the internet, because I could publish worldwide. I didn't have to ask for permission. I didn't have to ask anybody to do it for me. They couldn't take it away from me. My server was free because I basically had friends that ran them for me, these kind of things. And I loved that the hackiness of it was a thing. But now we have to start thinking about what do we do further with it.
Well, I think what we discovered when I was a postdoc at Stanford in the 1980s, that a computer system that did not have passwords. And why didn't have password? Who needs password? Gentlemen don't look at each other's files. And that was the system. I grew up on a kibbutz in Israel where we didn't lock the doors. We all have learned, now I live in Houston. Not only I lock the door, I have an alarm system. And so some of these bucolic ideas work well with a small community of people who know each other. and they don't scale. I mean, actually, we of any people should know about scalability, right? This is part of what computer science is about, scalability. How do we heard it before? How do we scale it to terabyte files, and how do we do it fast? We did not think about scaling social systems. You know, in some sense, you can think of the internet, the web, it's a social system. For example, I mentioned before Usenet. So in the 1980s, it was a lively forum of discussions. And then suddenly it was open to the whole world, and mostly the discussion was nerds to nerd. And then it went wide open, and it became just, excuse me, a bunch of crap. Just too many people did not contribute to meaningful discussion, and all the people that I knew abandoned Usenet because suddenly the signal-to-noise ratio was suddenly way too low. And so how to scale, you know, the open hacker culture of the early days was fantastic. I agree, I was there. It was exhilarating. It didn't scale. And we did not learn to think, okay, what mechanism do we need to put in place to make sure that it scales? And it was an anarchy. And anarchy works well in a, you know, if you look at you and your friends and your social group, there are no formal rules. It's an anarchy. If you don't behave well, we're not going to like you, we're not going to invite you, but it doesn't scale.
We should answer some of the questions that people had, because I have a lot, but I don't want to take that away from people. Technology is supposed to be a tool for the greater good, so why is there so little interdisciplinary discussion between all different stakeholders?
That's an excellent question. I think we need to have such interdisciplinary discussion. So one is, partly because we are very far from each other. So we are technologists. When it comes to talking about the social science of this, what do we know? We are nerds. We don't understand the social science of it. And in fact, partly, I think what happened is because we are so naive about social development. You go talk to the sociologists, they don't understand the technology. You go talk to the humanists, and they don't understand either society or technology. And they just will tell you about Socrates. But Socrates is very relevant today. Some of the questions they ask, what is the good life? We should ask this question. What life do we want to live? And so I think it's incumbent on us to start a conversation. You know, the other difficult part was to start conversing with politicians. Again, generally, we don't like to talk to politicians, but we need to have this conversation because regulating the internet is a good idea. But how to do it? That's the hard part. Okay? Aristotle said, getting angry is easy. But getting angry at the right person, for the right reason, at the right measure, that is very hard. So, you know, when you're regulating, you're holding a scalpel, right? When you're doing a surgery, you have to be extremely careful. You're doing only things to benefit the patient and not to kill the patient. And so in fact, some of the complaints about Europe, it's that the regulation is maybe too heavy-handed. And so we need to be very pragmatic about it, try things, fail, try other things, but absolutely, we need to have conversation between all the stakeholders. I'm all with that.
Cool. How would you even define what is ethical given culturological background or cultural backgrounds in this case?
So there is a philosophical, ethical problem has become very famous now, and that's the trolley problem. It was an obscure philosophical issue, and suddenly everybody's talking about the trolley problem. And the issue is, if you have a trolley and you have maybe 5 people on the rail, but you can switch it, and you'll save 5 people, but you kill 1 person, will you switch? So this was kind of a philosophical thought experiment. And so I think MIT has recently tried to do like this kind of survey, but tried to do it on a global scale, and discovered that there are difference between different cultures. For example, okay, 5 and 1. How many people do you have to save to kill 1 person? And different culture maybe think of differently, because there is an action that we don't like about intentionally deciding to kill this 1 person. In fact, there is a twist to it. Instead of switching, what happens if you have to push a heavy man in front of the trolley? And the heavy man will stop the trolley and you save the 5 people. So it turns out that the majority of people, at least in the United States, are switchers. They're willing to switch, but they're not pushers. They're not willing to push. That seems too much for them to push. So yes, there are different culture and there are different ethical background. But there are some principles that we universally share, even with all different culture. There are some principles that we share. And, you know, we may end up with the internet where the rules are not necessarily universal. We may have a baseline that we agree on universally, and when you have to have perhaps In fact, Microsoft has been calling, Brad Smith has been calling for a digital Geneva Treaty about some international agreements about what can be done, and that probably will be a baseline, and different countries may proceed differently. That doesn't mean that we all have to agree, have universal agreement about what is ethical. Europe has maybe will have more stringent rules about privacy than the United States. You know, this is all something we'll have to discover by starting regulation.
What do you think about that software license that somebody came up with, that you shouldn't use it for evil corporations or corporations that do bad things? It felt like an interesting stake in the ground, but at the same time, who defines that? Is somebody working on a nicotine website evil? Is it only weapons? Is it something? What about adult content? Do we have a problem that we're basically saying we're trying to find a technical solution for something that we actually have to define first where our limits are?
I mean, look, we struggle with these questions in other areas of society. Take, for example, you know, the United States tried, about 8 years ago, decided that alcohol is bad. So let's say selling alcohol become illegal. Well, we discovered that creates many, many more problems than it is created.
1920s showed that with prohibition already.
Yeah, so they had to repeal prohibition. It didn't work. It was an experiment. Didn't work. Now, you know, for many years we had the drug war, and the drug war does not seem to work either. And now it seems people are willing to relax. I don't know that we are saying that necessarily that using drugs is okay, but maybe it should not be, we should not go and criminalize it. And so this is ongoing, you know, how to regulate society is something we've been struggling with, going back to, what are we talking about? About 3,000 years more, Hammurabi's laws, right? When we start the experiment of regulating human behavior. And human behavior is messy. It's very hard to regulate human behavior. In fact, if you read the story, the creation story in the Bible, it's a story that even God failed to regulate human behavior.
And they didn't read the Apple terms and conditions.
Hmm?
They didn't read the Apple terms and conditions. That was the biggest problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Will America implement something similar like GDPR? What are your thoughts on that?
So I have to say that I'm not an expert on GDPR. What I've seen is that now when I try to access, for example, if I access the Los Angeles Times when I'm in Europe, they just says, nope, we don't serve it, we don't to mess with GDPR.
This is even better. They're like, we would love to give you our, what is the wording? We would love to give you our great journalism, but you live in Europe, so we can't do it because of the law. And I'm like, why don't you give me ads and let me pay for it, then I could access it.
Yeah. So one, I think this advertising business is just killing us. I mean, for example, it turns out if you look how much money Facebook is making on you, your user, it is something like maybe 5 cents per hour of usage. This is very little, I think of it. I mean, imagine how many people that really use Facebook will not be willing to pay even 25 cents per hour. I think most people would say yes. So the fact that they do not give us, at least as an opt-in model where I'm willing to pay, I want no tracking, no advertising. That will solve a lot of the problems. You know, I'm a heavy user of Google. I'm willing to pay for it. If some people are willing to do it, you know, use the free with advertising, okay, but at least give me a pass where I do not have to be under surveillance all the time.
What are your thoughts on ad blockers and tracker blockers?
On
ad blockers and tracker blockers. I mean, Firefox Focus, for example.
There is not a war between the ad blockers and the media. So I install ad blockers. Now you go to certain web pages, and they says you have ad blockers. So we are not showing you our content. You only can see our content if you are willing to read our advertisement. I mean, again, this is we have to get to the bottom of this and clean the house there and figure out how do we want to live the life. The problem is many of these web pages, these advertisements slow down the web page. Many of them you cannot really control who is supposedly putting advertisement. It's really an entry point to a lot of malware.
Yeah.
It's just this advertising business, I think, is a bottom of many of the ills that we have today on the internet.
But have we bred a whole generation of people that expect everything to be free, just with some shiny animated images around it?
Look, free is incredibly enticing. You know, If you have a, I have a sweet tooth, and when I have, like here, free dessert, I cannot say no. But if I have to pay for it, then I have no problem saying no. Okay? As soon as I have to pay for it, I say, no, I don't want it. But if it's free, I have a hard time resisting it. So, yeah, we have a whole generation who was educated on this allegedly free. I claim it is misleading. We are paying, but in a very opaque way. It's the other part that is the paradox here is that we think that we don't really think well about privacy. And so let me give you a parable. So imagine that you take a nude picture of yourself. Now you're willing to sell pixels. Let's say, I don't know, maybe $1 per pixel. You say, a pixel, this is nothing. But surely I'm willing to take $1 for a pixel. But we all understand that eventually, if enough people would like to buy a pixel of your nude picture, then your nude photograph is out there. We are giving away the data to Facebook and Google pixel by pixel. We click like, we click on a search. We have no idea how much information we're given about ourselves. I think maybe it was you who said they know more about us than we know about ourselves. Why is that? Because we give them to them 1 pixel at a time. And so we have no concept, how does it scale? What happens when somebody has so many pixels on you? And what it means now that when they are trying to influence us, which is all they're trying to do, all these advertisers, and as well as the fake news, and all of these people are trying to influence you. And because they may know you so much better than you know yourself, we are subject now to manipulation on a scale that we simply cannot comprehend because we don't have privacy. They have privacy. All this information is opaque. They don't show us what they know on us. They don't show us who received this information. We have no idea how this information is being used. So when people say, oh, I don't care about my privacy, I have nothing to hide, it's nonsense. You are totally naked out there, and you have no idea that you are.
Is there a need for learning more about our own behaviors? I remember, for example, in Firefox, there was an add-on called About Me that actually showed me at the end of the day how much time I spent on different things. And it was completely different from what I thought I would have done.
So I think people are now trying to put out some tools that will show you about time. Time is the easiest thing to track. I think time this is pretty much, you can already buy, even some of the tech companies now, in response to public pressure, are starting to put out tools that will show you how much money you're spending. But I think that's just a small part of it. I mean, the bigger part is how much about myself am I revealing? And that we have no idea.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I guess you will be around for a while?
I'll be hanging around, yeah, absolutely.
Possibly you will be okay to argue with people. I get that feeling.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so.
I thrive on disagreement. Come argue with me.
Thanks so much. This was great.
My pleasure.